Danielle.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Thank you all for being here today. I just want to start off by thanking Premier Jason Kenney for all the work that he's done over the last number of years. He and I had a number of differences on a number of things, but we had far more that we agreed upon. And I think he did just a tremendous job in the last couple of weeks of telling the Alberta story.
That's great.
Telling the Alberta story. If you could just go on mute if you're until we get into the Q&A, I'd sure appreciate it. But I think he's done just a tremendous job in the last couple of weeks telling the Alberta story internationally. He, of course, hosted Senator Joe Manchin, who came to Alberta, visited the oil sands, and then returned the favor going back to Washington. And if you watched the testimony in this past week, we certainly have a lot of work to do to find some common ground with our Ottawa colleagues. Laura, are you able to mute people as we go, or do I need to do that?
Do you want to just make me a host?
Yeah, hang on. Let me just make you a host, and then if we could all just please go on mute, I'd sure appreciate it. Sorry, Laura, I can't make you host, but okay. In any case, let me continue. I think he's done just a tremendous job of making sure that the world knows the pathway that our energy sector is on, and also that really important work with Ottawa trying to find areas of common ground. I think we've begun doing that, but it's going to take strong voices to continue doing that. I've been a student of the energy industry since my first run in politics in 2009, and I'm looking forward to continuing the great work that Premier Kenney has done on that, and also our energy industry. I think there is sort of a tendency to think, now that I'm decided that I'm going to jump back into politics, seeking the leadership of the UCP, that this is just a continuation of my last political life. And I would encourage you not to think that way, because so much has changed since 2015. I'm sure none of you are the same person you were in 2015, and I'm not either. I'm a mainstream conservative. I've seen a lot of dialogue going on about whether we are going to be swinging to the left or swinging to the right. We're all Albertans. We all want the best for Alberta. And I think that you will find that my campaign is going to be centered around putting Alberta interests, and Albertans first. And in every form that takes, if we can find some common ground with Ottawa as we proceed in striving toward a path of net zero in our energy sector, and finding ways to develop out our hydrogen economy, finding ways as well to use incredibly exciting carbon technology to capture and use carbon dioxide in useful ways, I think we can find some common ground. I think we can also find some common ground with our friends in Quebec in getting Ottawa to stay in its own lane and ensure that we continue to exercise our areas of provincial jurisdiction. The Premier also had, I think, a good win in the last week, where he was asked, where we ended up winning at the appeals court level in a 4-1 judgment on the issue of C-69, which is a clear violation of provincial jurisdiction, in that it is attempting to regulate virtually every aspect of our economy in violation of our 1930s Natural Resources Act, in violation of Section 92A of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You'll find that I will be a very strong voice in making sure that we push back against Ottawa, collaborate where we can in areas of joint jurisdiction, but they will not be able to continue invading our areas of jurisdiction or dictating to us how we deliver our programs. We've seen this in healthcare, we're seeing it in daycare, we're seeing it in dental care and pharmaceutical care and long-term care. And we need to demonstrate that we will take care of Albertans the way that makes sense for us. And we're not going to be enticed by the federal government using its spending power to dictate to us how we deliver those programs. So those are the areas that I think are going to be vitally important for us to come together on. And it's really important for us as Albertans to come together. Part of the I think judgment of the grassroots yesterday was that, as much as the Premier had hoped that he had balanced lives and livelihoods during the course of COVID, I think that there are many who felt he didn't get that right balance. I think we have a lot of division that has happened between friends, a lot of division that has happened between family members, and we need to stop dividing people along identity lines, vaxxed, unvaxxed, or any of the various identity politics that we've seen play out over the last couple of years. We are stronger, united. And I would say that that also holds for our conservative movement as well. It's very clear that Jim and I made a big error in how we tried to bring the conservative movement together. But part of the reason that I'm running for the United Conservative Party is that I think it's a bit of an academic discussion about what might have been the case when we were looking at the political landscape back in the election of 2015, I think it's very clear that today we're facing a formidable opposition in the legislature that is unified, and we cannot see a fracturing of the conservative movement along the lines of multiple different political parties. I've felt that when Jim and I made the decision that we did to join forces in 2015. I was cheering along Brian Jean and Jason Kenney as they did it appropriately and properly, consulting the grassroots. And I'm looking forward to making that same argument so that we can bring some folks back into the fold. I think that Todd Lowen and Drew Barnes, would love to see them throw their name in the race for leadership in this UCP contest, so that we can start unifying the movement again, because there's going to be a lot of work. It's going to require all hands on deck over the next couple of years to make sure that we stay unified, that we focus on the things that we need to do. And oh, sorry guys, we got lots of crosstalk going on here.
Guys, there's a lot of people not on mute. There's almost 200 people in this call. Please,
guys,
put
we
your
need to
mute
be
on
on
now
mute.
immediately.
This is not going to work if people are trying to get some audio for radio and television. If you guys can all please go on mute, sure would appreciate it. All right, so I think I've said enough so that you know where I'm going. Let's see if we can get into the Q&A. I think at this point, we would like to make sure that you put up your hand so that we can do one person at a time. And Laura, I'll turn it over to you so that we can get into the conversation.
All right, good morning, everybody. So Brianna, I think you were first, so go ahead. Try to make it as quick as possible. There's a lot of questions and a lot of people in here, and we do have a hard out at 11:45 again, as a reminder.
No worries. Thanks, Laura. Danielle, first I want to ask you, this is expected to be a crowded field. You want at least Lowen and Barnes to run. So I wonder what you think your odds are and what's going to make you a front runner.
Well, I'm going to run to win. You never enter into a contest thinking that you're going to come in second place. And I welcome as many people in the race as want to participate, because to me, the more the merrier. This is a real opportunity for the United Conservative Party to make sure that we're selling memberships, we're getting volunteers activated, we're getting people excited again about our vision. I love sharing ideas. I love the clash of visions. And so I would say the more the merrier. I'm expecting to learn as we go along through this entire process. I'm sure there'll be some fantastic ideas that come forward from some of the other candidates. I think for me, because I've been there before, I know some of the challenges that a leader faces. I know both aspects of this party that come from the traditional Wildrose base and their expectation of grassroots decision making. And I also know the incredible talent that we have from the progressive conservative roots of this party and the professionalization that happened under the UCP. So we want to make sure that those two traditions in our party are recognized and honored. And so I think I can do that. In addition, there's so much that needs to be done on the energy front. I've spent the last year working as a business advocate. Prior to that, I spent 6 years on radio doing every possible interview I could with business leaders, energy leaders, environmental leaders, as well as those who are in this exciting world of carbon tech. And so I think we don't want to lose any ground on that front. It's a big learning curve to fully understand how the energy industry works. And I'm prepared to do that. I'm also running in an area where we've got food producers in the ranching sector, in the farming sector, and I've been a landowner rights advocate going back to 1999. So I've got I think a very solid history on that front also. And I respect the role of the individual MLA. I know that we have some incredible talent in the UCP caucus, and I would love to be able to foster and elevate some of those voices so that everyone can see just how talented some of the caucus and cabinet are.
As a quick follow-up, you talked about uniting people. I'm wondering, I think that the last few leaders have proven that we can't have a big tent conservative party in Alberta anymore. So I wonder whether you think the party itself needs to go further left or right.
I don't think this is a right or left issue. I mean, I think one of the things, Laura, are you able to just sort of call out who needs to just monitor who's making the noise there and just call them out?
Over 200 people. Yeah. If people are not on mute, they will be kicked out. So please ensure you are muted.
Okay, thank you. Let me just start that again. If you look at what happened during the UCP leadership contest, and even those who were counting ballots observed this, that there are a lot of people who got brought into the UCP who had never been in politics before. And I think that that is what has occurred. Is there are a lot of people who are just going along minding their own business, and now their entire lives have been disrupted in the last 2 years. People are hurting about what's happened to their kids and the fact that their kids have lost ground in education over the last 2 years. People are hurting because they haven't been able to take part in important family events. People are hurting because they have loved ones that they may not be able to see or haven't seen as they were dying in hospital or in long-term care. There are people who have lost their jobs. There are people who still can't travel across the border. And so that activated a lot of people saying, what is going on? And what can we do to make sure that the government gets back into the role that we expected it to, so that we have a strong economy, but also one that respects individual families and individual communities. And so I would say that that is not really a left or right issue, and making sure that we have strong education system, strong healthcare system, that we can reform how our healthcare delivery works, that we can reform our long-term care to make sure that it's protecting our most vulnerable, especially as we get into respiratory virus season. These to me are everybody issues. So I don't really see it as left or right. And I think that is a very unifying message, that if we can start doing things the way we've done them historically in Alberta, start focusing on the things that we can all be very proud of, then I think the UCP is going to be very successful. I don't think it's really a matter of going left or right.
All right, Bill Kaufman, go ahead. You were next.
Yes, hi, Danielle. I know that some of your critics might well point to your departure from your radio gig, and they'll say, well, you know, you left because you couldn't stand the heat, you couldn't handle the heat, and you know, if what makes you think you can as a political leader?
Oh, I can handle heat. I've handled heat for a lot of years. What I can't handle is the cancel culture, and that's what we've got to really push back against. The way I conducted myself on radio is the way I think that that we should be seeing the media operate. That we should be prepared to listen to all voices, and we don't have to agree with all voices, but we've got to give everybody a hearing so that we can find out where the areas of common ground are and the areas of divide are. What I've observed over the last 2 years, unfortunately, is that there's only been one official version and one official view you can have on a whole range of issues. And what that is causing is greater polarization, is dividing a certain group of people to seek a confirmation bias in certain alternative media sources, and others to seek confirmation bias in other alternative media sources. I'd like to see the media return to the role that it had historically. I entered the media back in 1998. It was fair, accurate, and balanced. And that's part of the reason why I felt like I had to leave the airwaves a couple of years ago, is we're not seeing very much balance. I hope that in politics, sometimes what happens is political leadership can also lead to leadership more generally. And I'm hoping that we can get back to a more balanced discussion, because we have to stop talking past each other. We have to have forums where people can agree. I think Brian Mason used to say we can disagree, but we don't have to be disagreeable. And if we can get back to more of that, and I can be a voice in helping to foster that kind of understanding, I'm delighted to do so. And I do hope that that we are beginning to turn a corner. I think a lot of people are getting very frustrated that one false move or one wrong statement or one word that they say taken out of context can result in complete character assassination and destruction. And I believe in redemption. I think that people make mistakes, and they've got to be able to atone for them, apologize for them, and have a way back. And I think we've kind of lost that, but I think people are turning the corner, and they want to see more of that. And that's what I hope to bring to the discussion.
Yeah, and there's another line of thought here that goes that what's really needed in this race are completely fresh new faces, and people like you and Mr. Jean are not that. What would you say to that?
I think we need both. I mean, when you look at the federal level, Pierre Poilievre is probably the strongest contender, and he's been in elected office since 2004. There's things that you learn along the way in politics in different roles. I've always made sure that when I've been out of politics that I've gone on to do other things. I've gone into the media, I've gone into business advocacy. My husband and I started a business 5 years ago, so we were at the front line of experiencing what every restaurateur experienced over the last couple of years. And those kind of experiences all lend themselves to being able to bring perspective and being a good political leader. So that's why I'm putting my name forward. I'm sure that's the reason why Brian's putting his name forward too, but I 100% agree with you. Some fresh faces in this race, I think would be energizing and would be really exciting. And I hope a few people do step forward.
Okay, Dean, go ahead.
Thanks, Danielle. I'll keep it to one question so others can get one in. They're going to determine in caucus today who the interim leader is going to be, but there's conflicting reports that maybe the premier will leave immediately, or maybe he'll stay for 6 months. What would you like to see? What's the best thing for the party? Should he stay for the race or should he leave immediately?
I think the premier did a lot of work in helping to get to reconciliation and an apology from the Vatican and from the Pope. And the Pope is visiting in July. And if he wants to stay and be premier so that he can, I think, receive the honor that he deserves for helping to make the Vatican realize they needed to take that important step, I wouldn't object to that. If the caucus makes another decision, then that'll be up to them. But I think that the premier, in recognizing what was best for the party, that there did need to be a period of time where it needed to heal and move on with some new leadership. I would defer to caucus in making that judgment, but I wouldn't object if he wanted to stay until that critical event happens in July.
Hey, Andrew Lawton, go ahead.
Thank you. So obviously there has been some fracturing over the pandemic response from Premier Kenney, but also on the independence question. You have some harsh critics, including the now independent MLA Drew Barnes, about the Fair Deal report. You also have the Wildrose Independence Party. So what's your strategy to re-engage, if you can, and reach out to some of these people that don't feel the UCP is the best vehicle to advance an Alberta agenda nationally?
So let me deal with the first one on the issue of COVID. I think that we, after the trucker convoy, clearly have a consensus in this province that when we get into the respiratory virus season in the fall, that we've got to go in a different direction, that we can't sacrifice our kids any longer. We got to let our kids be kids, as one of the advocacy groups has said. And I think that there's widespread consensus on that. I don't know if you watched the game last night. I think we all did. I was up pretty late cheering for both teams. And I think that just the turnout that we're seeing in our arenas is a demonstration that people are prepared to start treating the COVID to start treating COVID as endemic, and so I think that's really important. So in the fall, when we do end up with respiratory virus season in high gear again, we have to make sure that we take a focused protection approach so that our vulnerable seniors can feel safe, can feel protected. We've got to make sure that we've got effective therapeutics available within immediate diagnosis so that people don't end up deteriorating and going into hospital. So I think people need to have some confidence that there's another way for us to address this issue, and that will be unifying. So that would be number one. On the issue of autonomy, I believe in Alberta autonomy, and to me, that is defined in a number of different ways. I've been taken part in a couple of sessions with Rob Anderson, who has proposed a Free Alberta strategy, the centerpiece of which is an Alberta Sovereignty Act, which would essentially be a notwithstanding clause on federal legislation that intrudes in our area of jurisdiction. And that would be one of the key pieces of legislation that we would need to pass, is that if the federal government dares to intrude in provincial jurisdiction, we're just not going to enforce it in this province. That would be one thing. The other thing is we need to collect our own personal income taxes. I think people need to see just how much money continues to be taken out of this province for federal priorities, because every single time the federal government announces a national program, they're expecting Albertans to pay the lion's share of the cost and underwrite it and pay more than it costs to deliver the services. So if we start asserting ourselves on those two issues, I think we'll find that there is an appetite for us to assert ourselves in other areas. And that's what I would, those are the kind of things that—
Excuse me, guys, please mute immediately or you will be kicked out. Dean, you're off mute. Thank you.
So those would be the kind of things that I think can unite the independents, those who are advocating for something that goes, I think, further than most Albertans want. I think Albertans just want some respect. I think they want Ottawa to be as deferential to Alberta's interests and Alberta's rights as they are to Quebec's. And Quebec is going through a process where they've declared themselves a nation within a nation. Saskatchewan has declared themselves a nation within a nation. We've got to start asserting our rights and our responsibilities in our areas of jurisdiction. And I think if we start doing that, we'll develop a new relationship with Ottawa, which will be constructive for the entire country, and certainly more constructive than we've seen in the last few years. So those would be the things that I would be advocating on as a priority. Laura, you going to call the next person?
Yeah, sorry, Tim Bruch, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. Just wondering if you are in fact chosen as Jason Kenney's successor, do you have any plans to move that May 2023 election forward?
I don't see any reason to at the moment. I mean, I obviously consult more broadly on it, but if it depends on when the leadership race is over. I think that there's enough time for us to get the leadership decided in September. And that would allow for a fall legislative session, and it would allow for a spring legislative session all the way through to passing a budget. So the timing on that seems pretty good. It's actually a bit better that it's moved a little bit later. Personally, if it had been my choice in setting a fixed election date, I would have set it every second year in conjunction with the municipals, so that you'd have the municipals every third week in October in 1 year, and then 2 years later you'd have the provincials every third week in October. I mean, I don't know if there'd be an appetite for that. Maybe it's something that should go to a citizen-initiated referenda or a province-wide referenda. I think it would make a lot of sense to have that kind of certainty and that kind of commitment to making sure that you're doing it at the same time. And I think there'd be, a little more regularity in doing it that way. But I don't see any problem with having it where it's determined at the end of May. I think that allows us to get through quite a bit of a legislative agenda in 2 sessions.
And my quick follow-up here, you mentioned September there. Is that just speculation at this point, or do you have any reason to believe that's actually going to be the month?
I've talked to a couple of party officials, people who've been on the board before, and we talked about what kind of time frame we would need to be able to do an in-person vote. The federal party has their leadership race ongoing, but they are doing a mail-in ballot just for the logistics of doing a national vote. So I think their cutoff is June 3rd, and they won't be announcing until September. So I would imagine that us having something quite similar along that same time frame, so that we could have it wrapped up by September, would make the most sense. I think if they go much later than that, it is going to impair the ability of doing something meaningful in the fall legislative session. It's going to be a pretty crucial session.
All right, Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I've just got one. Danielle, you've previously expressed concerns that with Kenney at the helm, the UCP would split and open the way for the NDP to win in the next election. Do you still have those fears, or what's your general sense now, and where do you think you need to get to avoid an NDP win in 2023?
The premier, I think, has done the right thing in recognizing there was that danger of a vote split. I mean, I think that the question will be to Brian Jean and to Drew Barnes and to Todd Lowen and to Paul Hinman, who I've all texted over the last 24 hours saying, hey, you guys should all jump into the race. I would love to see them all jump into the race, because I think that would be really unifying. They all have a different vision for what the province should be and where we should go. And I think that would be the best way to ensure that all the ideas get on the table, and that we have a really robust leadership race. But I think at the moment, there's a lot of repair work to do. Let's be frank about it. There's a lot of people who were disappointed and who want to make sure that we're charting a path that's, I think, more consistent with what UCP members have put in their policy book and in their principles. And so I think I think the members are going to watch that over the course of the summer and fall, and whoever is chosen in autumn will reflect that, what the grassroots have told them. And so I feel pretty optimistic. If you look at what's happening at the federal level, my understanding is they've got the highest number of memberships they've ever had. And so leadership races can be really energizing. And that's why I'm pretty confident that if we get enough people in this race sharing a lot of ideas, that we'll be able to unify once again and be ready to face off against the NDP in the spring.
Hey, Janet, go ahead.
Hi there. So I heard you say in-person vote, and which prompted me to hope that you would weigh in on how you think the party should run this leadership race. There's a lot of discussion, obviously, about this round. What kind of vote would you like to see? How would it work?
In-person vote, 100%. I had people asking me if I'd heard that there were 9,000 ballots that were destroyed in the process yesterday. I've talked to at least a dozen or more people who didn't receive their ballot or received them late. I went through the experience of a mail-in ballot in my last leadership run, and there were months afterwards that ballots were straggling in. We have to make sure that everybody feels that the result has integrity and that everybody feels that their vote is counted. So there's a way that you can do that. I mean, the province naturally divides around 8 major economic centers: Fort McMurray, Grand Prairie, Lloydminster, Cold Lake area, Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, Medicine Hat, Lethbridge. If you can even have 8 major polling stations so that everybody has no more than a couple hours drive to get to an in-person balloting station, I think that would be ideal. If they generate enough money to be able to do a balloting station in every constituency, that would be excellent too. But barring that, I think it needs to be an in-person vote if we're going to make sure that everybody feels some confidence in the process.
Just to follow up, I wanted to verify that you are in fact interested in running in Livingston-McLeod, and if so, why there? Why that constituency?
I ran in the riding of Highwood last time, and I moved to High River to do that. I'm old-fashioned. I feel like you should live in the riding that you represent. And so High River has now been redrawn into the riding of Livingston-McLeod. So it's High River goes down Highway 2 to Waterton and then stretches over to the Crow's Nest Pass. And so I've lived in this beautiful town since 2011 and love it more and more with each passing year. And so it seems to me the obvious place to put my name forward would be in this riding.
Okay, Adam, go ahead.
The federal leadership race has seen a decided shift towards supporting freedom, the truckers, ending mandates. Alberta has also launched a challenge against the Emergencies Act, which we are, meanwhile, though, we're still seeing targeted charges against pastors and small business owners. Some of these are being dropped, fortunately. Others are still clogging up the courts. Are you willing to commit to staying charges and freezing ongoing investigations against those emanating from the lockdown? And how do you plan to restore faith in the courts and in politics?
Yes, we have to, we never should have come down on pastors the way we did. Every other jurisdiction, it seems, we're able to enforce their measures without putting pastors in jail, and it's created so much division in our communities. So yes, we should drop those. We should also drop charges against small businesses. Part of the reason why we're enjoying the freedoms that we have today and the ability to go and watch hockey games is because there were some courageous people who stood up and said, you know what, there's another way to do this. Enough is enough. It took the politicians a little while longer to realize that, but now that they've realized that, I think part of the healing process is to make sure that some of those charges are dropped. The other thing we need to do, though, is we need to have a full reckoning about what happened, who made the decisions, why they made the decisions that they did, and why they didn't look at other evidence that was being put forward in other jurisdictions that took a different path. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of public inquiries. They tend to cost a lot of money and end up with a multi-page report that I question if anybody reads, but I think we could do hearings, multi-party hearings, where we could be talking to some of the key decision makers on a fact-finding mission to make sure that this doesn't happen again. I'm very supportive of Todd Lowen's approach. He's attempting to bring some provisions into the Public Health Act that would have the same kind of oversight on decisions of the legislature when it gets invoked as the Emergencies Act does. I think we saw at the federal level that it's a pretty extreme measure to invoke the Emergencies Act, but there are multiple checks and balances on that. We don't have those same checks and balances in the Public Health Act. And so I think we need to make sure that we do, so that people have some confidence that this won't happen again.
And just a quick follow-up, for those people who perhaps spend weeks or months incarcerated, do you feel that there's some sort of compensation or rectification, or that the government needs to do something to make up for what they've been through?
It's, you know, I personally, when I look at some of the work that the Society for Wrongful Incarceration has done nationally. I suspect that there's likely to be some kind of civil suit that would be associated with that. And, so I don't know if any of those civil suits are ongoing. If they are, I wouldn't necessarily want to weigh in, but it wouldn't surprise me if somebody feels that they've been wrongfully incarcerated. And I've spoken with both Pastor Coates as well as his wife, Erin. I've spoken with people who had spoken with Pastor Pavlovsky as well, who had a pretty rough time, it sounds like, in prison. It wouldn't surprise me if there was going to be some compensation forthcoming there, but I'll have to wait and see. One of the things that may help solve what happened is an apology. I think there's a lot of people feeling that no one's taken any accountability for the harms that have been caused, whether it's pastors who were put in prison, or whether it was businesses that were shut down, or there's people who lost their jobs, or whether it's families that got torn apart. And so I'm prepared to go around the province and apologize on behalf of the government, and to try to find a way that we can make some amends. And that I hope that's enough, because we're so much stronger if we can focus on the future rather than the past. But I do think that we have to recognize that there are a lot of hurt people, and there's going to be a lot of healing that still needs to be done. And I hope I can help play that role too.
All right, Amanda's next, but Doug Welpton, can you please put yourself on mute? Yes, go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, hi, Danielle. It's Amanda Brown here at the Western Standard. I was wondering if you might just elaborate a bit further about how you can allay Albertans' concerns about your focus and loyalty to the UCP in the light of your crossing the floor from the Wildrose. I get the feeling that there's a lot of people concerned about that when I read social media and so on. I was wondering how you can sort of robustly respond to that concern.
Well, I have been a mainstream conservative my whole life. I joined the Progressive Conservatives back in 1992 when I was the president of the campus club at the University of Calgary. And I stayed with the Progressive Conservatives until 2008. When it was pretty clear the direction that we were going in the province was not the direction I felt that most Albertans wanted to go. In 2015, when Jim Prentice came back to Alberta, he'd been the first campaign manager that I worked under in 1992. And I felt like he just might be the guy to get us back on track. I know that's not what Albertans wanted me to do. They wanted me to continue holding him to account. I didn't. It was a big mistake on my part. And I think we both got judged very harshly for that. But I think in the end, we both recognize, I think Albertans have recognized that, especially in this environment with the NDP polling at 44%, that if we split this movement, we are not going to be successful in forming government. So I would hope that people would see that me entering back into politics with the UCP shows my commitment to unity. I was one of the early vocal voices on unity. Granted, going about it the wrong way, but I remain a vocal supporter of unity, and I hope I can be that voice of unity as we go through the leadership campaign.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right, Carrie, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Danielle, you mentioned that you were been texting with Paul Hindman and other people who may be potential leadership candidates. How do you balance this idea that the UCP is a mainstream conservative party with having the people, Wildrose Independent Party right now is a fringe party. With how would you keep it all together when you're bringing in all those elements?
Well, Paul Hindman supported Jason Kenney when Jason Kenney won. I think he felt like the premier would take some action in making sure that we asserted ourselves in Confederation. And if you agreed with that a few years ago, maybe he can be persuaded to agree with that again. I haven't given up on Canada. I haven't given up on Alberta's relationship with Canada. I think Albertans want to have a fair deal and a new deal with the rest of the country. And to me, it requires every voice to make sure that we can make that case. So Paul Hindman happens to be a very dear friend of mine. I've known him for a lot of years. And as I said before, what I learned in radio is you've got to be prepared to listen to the voices across the spectrum, find areas where you can agree and collaborate and move forward on that front. But I believe that we need to get a better deal with Canada, and we need to make sure that we're putting the priorities of Albertans first. And those are the kind of things that I think we can find some common cause on.
Just back to something you had said on the pandemic about dropping charges on small businesses and against certain pastors. How do you balance that with being politics meddling in basically the justice system? That is a big step for a leader to make that type of statement.
Politics meddled in the healthcare system. Politics, we never used to have pastors fearing that they were going to be arrested. We never had business owners fearing that they were going to be arrested. So we made bad political decisions that I think were over-enforced. And I think it's completely legitimate to offer amnesty when the government has clearly made a mistake. We shouldn't have been coming down that hard on people. They were able to get away. They were able to get around doing that in other jurisdictions. This was a political decision to do that kind of enforcement. And because it was a political error, in my opinion, then I think it requires some political courage to admit the error and to reverse it.
All right, so we've got 10 minutes left here or so. So if you have any questions, please put your hand up now. We only have time for a couple more. So Micah Quinn, go ahead.
Hi there. Sorry about that. My hand wasn't able to get raised here in the Zoom option. Not sure what's going on there. Danielle, I know there's been a lot of talk of multiple candidates potentially running for the UCP leadership, like Drew Barnes, Travis Daves, Doug Schweitzer, Ron Ambrose, and Brian Jean, who already announced he is planning to put his name in. What is your strategy going against those potential candidates, and what will you do to differentiate yourself from them?
Well, I feel like I'm running with those candidates as opposed to against them, because the names that you mentioned are all just tremendous people with tremendous ideas, and the cabinet ministers that you mentioned, I think, have done a terrific job in their portfolios. So I hope that we can have a cordial leadership contest where we recognize at the end of it that we're all going to be supporting each other on a single team. That is going to be my approach. And we'll see whether or not that tone is adopted by some of the other leadership candidates. But that's been my approach. I spent 6 years on radio listening to people from across the political divide, interviewing people from every political perspective, and almost every single time I found an area of an agreement with somebody, even if we started off with an area of disagreement. So that's going to be my approach. It's going to be my style. Let's find the things that we can agree on and move forward on those. And I'm just looking forward to a robust discussion and debate about the future of the UCP and the future of Alberta.
All right, Catherine, go ahead.
Thanks very much. I want to go back to something you mentioned, working with Rob Anderson on this sort of notwithstanding clause. And I'm wondering if you got any legal opinion on that, or how does that actually work in practice to give Alberta that option to opt out of federal laws?
Well, Rob Anderson is a lawyer himself. He's been practicing law since he left politics, and he was actually a practicing lawyer before he went in. So he's got a whole team of people that he's been working with in drafting that strategy. And so it seems to me that we've got a pretty solid endorsement from the Alberta Court of Appeal in saying that the federal government certainly overstepped in trying to insert itself in approving projects that are 100% within the borders of Alberta. So there's it's pretty clear that that is a direction that has, in my opinion, already been endorsed by the courts, and we'll see what happens at the Supreme Court level. But it does strike me that it's that we have a constitution for a reason, and we have a division of powers for a reason, and that is just because we have allowed the federal government to creep into our areas of jurisdiction doesn't mean that it should continue. So I'd be looking forward to talking to him more and presenting more of those ideas. But once we've figured out the best way to draft that legislation, we'll be putting it forward if I'm elected in the fall.
And a follow-up, if I may. Premier Kenney had said he didn't want to repeat that Lake of Fire incident, and I'm wondering this time around, how do you balance that right of free speech with where the mainstream of Alberta is these days?
Not everybody is cut out to be a candidate, and every candidate, I think, has to do that initial self-assessment of whether they're going to be able to express themselves in a way that is going to be enhancing of the team, or if it's going to bring the team down. And what I've seen over the last number of years is that there've been a couple of different mechanisms that have been developed to make sure that the candidates are vetted. I absolutely support the grassroots in having that first process. But I think that caucus also, we've seen that if they feel that a person is not going to be a constructive member of the team, they've had the ability to vote on that and ask someone to leave. And that's how it works. It's politics is not just an individual sport, it's also a team sport. And so I would hope what would happen is that most people would do that first self-assessment. And if they're better cut out for advocacy because they have particularly strong views in one particular area, I would hope that they would dedicate themselves toward advocacy. Because once you get elected, you've got to represent every single constituent. And so it takes a certain type of person to be able to do that. But there is a mechanism, I think, that's pretty well established now in the UCP, that if somebody is seen to be destructive to the team, that then it's the team that gets to decide if that person gets to continue on under that banner. And I'd honor that tradition that's been developed in the party.
Do you have any further questions this morning?
There's a few hands up there, Laura, Adam, and Amanda.
Yeah,
and
they already asked their questions. Adam, Amanda, and Carrie, do you still need your hands up?
I'm happy to ask another question, but it was just staying up from before. You know what? Let's ask another question. You mentioned Drew Barnes. You mentioned Todd Lowen. Many of these people sort of advocating on behalf of rural communities, not these metropolitan centers. This is certainly a community you can advocate for. How do you reconcile the wants and needs of perhaps a more liberal, progressive area like Edmonton, a potentially more conservative, definitely energy-oriented city like Calgary, and then rural communities?
Every region of the province is so different. And I think one of the things we have to do is we've got to be consistent. If we're going to rail against equalization at the federal level, then we can't keep doing the same thing to our municipalities. I think that Mayor Jody Gondek has a great point. I've looked at it too. The amount of money that gets taken out of Calgary in education property taxes versus what gets transferred back in municipal grants. There was a policy debate years ago in when Lyle Oberg was running for the leadership of the PCs about leaving the education property tax in the city where it's generated. And at the time, it was $1.2 billion. And if we had done that and just allowed it to grow with the growth in the various communities, that education property tax is now generating $2.4 billion. So are we just going to keep on doing this, having all that money go into general revenues, or are we going to actually finally develop a fair deal for our cities? So I'd like to talk with the two big mayors, two mayors of the two biggest cities first, just to see if there's an appetite to have that discussion about how over time the province would be able to re-identify that education property tax, call it a provincial capital contribution, and see if there's a way that we can phase that in. Because I think that Calgary and Edmonton have very different issues. The bigger a city gets, the more they have to deal with homelessness and mental health. They have to deal as well with transit issues, transportation, traffic. It becomes a lot more complicated. So we have to respect that Calgary and Edmonton have different priorities, different character, and they need to have the dollars associated with that to make sure that they can meet the needs of their citizens. But I would say that holds equally true in every municipal jurisdiction. I mean, the benefit of attempting to represent this riding in Livingston-McLeod is we've got towns of all size here. And I was having a conversation with one of my towns about the FCSS program. And the leader of that program said, oh, if I could just have $30,000, I'd be able to hire a mental health counselor so that we can make sure that our seniors are doing okay and our teenagers are doing okay. There's so much that can be done with small amounts of money at the municipal level. And I think if we're going to be consistent in saying that we don't want to have dollars coming out of Alberta to subsidize programs in the rest of the country, I think that we've got to make sure that we've got that same approach with our municipalities. And that'll go a long way to end these divisions. When you look at all the fights that happen between the municipalities and the provincial government, often it comes down to inadequate funding or the province not matching the funding priorities of the municipality. I think if we trust our municipalities are responsive to their own electorates, and we make sure that they've got the dollars that they need right up front so that they can make sure when they're going for federal grants, they immediately have both the municipal and the provincial share. I think that that will go a long way to showing the mutual respect and also to trying to alleviate some of those concerns that we have between municipalities.
All right, so Danielle does have to go here, everybody. If you have any follow-ups or need some clarification, please do send me an email at danielle@daniellesmith.ca and we can get those answered. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.